Hi, this week we'll be taking a look at the nervous system, more specifically the central nervous system. Let's first take a look at kind of the overview of the nervous system and how we can break it down into its parts. If you recall from anatomy, the nervous system is divided into two parts. The central nervous system, CNS, and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system is made up of two components: the brain and the spinal cord. Everything outside the brain and spinal cord is considered part of the peripheral nervous system. Now let's take a little closer look at the peripheral nervous system. So again, everything outside the brain and the spinal cord. We can divide the peripheral nervous system into two parts: a sensory sometimes called somatosensory or afferent part of the nervous system, and then what's called a motor or efferent part. So these terms afferent and efferent refer to sensory and motor components. Sensory information, so information brought from the senses to the central nervous system, can be divided into somatic and visceral. From the organs, and then from the muscles and glands, or muscles, which bring information into the central nervous system. The motor components can be divided up into a somatic also, and these pathway leads to skeletal muscles. So this is a voluntary pathway. I'll put voluntary. Alright. So those neurons, or as information passes out to our muscles and our glands, so we get some kind of reaction, information can go and pass to the skeletal muscles, which we control. The other part of those motor, or the efferent part of the nervous system, is called the autonomic. The autonomic nervous system, which we'll talk about later on in more detail. So autonomic sounds just like it. We say autonomic is automatic, so it is involuntary. So the cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and glands, things we don't control. So information can pass from the central nervous system to along autonomic pathways to those things that we can't control. Now the autonomic nervous system can further be divided into two components: the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. And we'll talk more about that later. Alright. Okay, so let's take a closer look. We're going to study the central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord this week. And so let's take a little closer look. Now when you do your reading, the reading covers a lot of different brain structures, which you will need to know the functions of all those different structures. So you'll need to refer to the study guide to see what those specific structures are. Now the nervous system can be divided into two different types of cells. And you've learned this in anatomy: the neurons, or nerve cell, and the neuroglia, or glial cells. Glia comes from the word that means glue, because it holds together and supports the nervous system. In fact, about 90% of the nervous system is made up of these types of cells. the neuroglia, and only a small part of the nervous system are actually neurons, which transmit messages distances. Now let's take a quick look at neuroglia. There are 6 types of neuroglia. And again, this is something you've covered in anatomy, but talk briefly about some of these. The astrocytes, the ependymal cells, the microglia, and oligodendrocytes. There's other types of microglia, the neurolemmacytes and the satellite cells, which are found in the peripheral nervous system. These are components or glial cells found within the central nervous system. The astrocytes are important in formation of what's called the blood-brain barrier. And you'll need to read about that. What is the blood-brain barrier? It's a protective barrier to help protect it from toxins and bad things that might enter it. And it's made up of actually specialized capillaries, and these capillaries are continuous capillaries. They contain gap junctions or tight junctions, which prevent materials, drugs, and chemicals from reaching the brain and protecting it. In addition, it has these astrocytes, which are specialized glial cells that contain these feet-like projections that wrap around those particular types of capillaries, and that, in conjunction with these specially tight or non-porous capillaries, will prevent materials from passing into the brain. The ependymal cells are found within the brain and are important in creating the cerebrospinal fluid, the CSF. This, along with structures called choroid plexuses, or a choroid plexus, which is a network of capillaries. So this network of capillaries, the choroid plexus plus these specialized ependymal cells, create the cerebrospinal fluid, and that cerebrospinal fluid is formed within the spaces within the brain called the ventricles, and circulates through and around the brain and the spinal cord, kind of cushioning it and protecting the brain and the spinal cord. So you'll need to read a little bit more about the ependymal cells. The microglial cells are specialized immune cells found within the nervous system. And then the oligodendrocytes are cells that myelinate neurons in the central nervous system. There's another type of neuroglia called the neurolemmacyte, or the Schwann cells found in the peripheral nervous system that myelinate the neurons out there. Again, you'll need to review all the different parts of the brain and know their functions. And again, that list is in your study guide. All right, so that's just an introduction to the nervous system, and I hope you enjoy that.